Well, hi, everybody. It's February the 1st, 2024. It's David Leis here. I'm your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier, and a warm welcome to everybody. We're so glad that you could join us live on X and live on YouTube. We've got a really quite an interesting topic today, and it's all about, are we at war with what's called China, the Communist Party of China, to be precise. And it's really quite a revealing question. As we peel the perennial onion, we're going to go down deep into a lot of different levels of this question. And you probably haven't heard that question posed before. So I hope you bear with us, and we're welcoming your comments and your questions. So we're delighted by our ever-growing audience. In fact, it's amazing. This week we've blown the barrier with Apple Podcasts as in the top 50 news podcasts in the country. So we're really delighted by that. So keep subscribing and sharing, liking, get into those algorithms that the so-called tech gods have so much power over. But we really do appreciate your comments and feedback, and it's really been very exciting. So a warm welcome to everybody. And speaking of which, I want to extend a warm welcome to our special guest, Scott McGregor. Scott is an author of a number of very interesting articles and analyses, and a book called The Mosaic Effect, which deals with this very question. So welcome, Scott.
Hi, thank you for having me, David.
Well, Scott, it's great to have you because you are an intelligence professional. You've done a lot of work across the RCMP, military intelligence services, and internationally as well. And so it's with that kind of background and insight that we're going to talk today about a very important question, and that is Canada at war with China? What do you think, Scott?
Well, I would like to say that I don't think Canada realizes that we're at war. But what we do know is that China is definitely at war with Canada. And we know
Wow.
that. We know that. There's evidence for this, yes.
Okay, and it's not just a little bit of evidence, right, Scott? It's a boatload of evidence that shows that China's waging war with Canada, but we're kind of, what the heck? Why wouldn't Canada be aware of this?
Yeah, there's empirical evidence. One of the biggest ones I think that people are probably most familiar with is the cyber attacks. And that China is attacking our government institutions in British Columbia alone, just in British Columbia, 6,000 times a minute. And that's all from the state. That's not some kid hacking in his basement somewhere.
Wow.
That's a government military establishment that's conducting
Okay,
that.
so the headline is that the CPC, under their state authority, is got armies of people waging cyber attacks on Canada. Why would they do that? I mean, I know they're doing that right across the West and beyond, but why would you be waging cyber attacks on another country like that?
There's a number of reasons. Part of it is to collect information so that they can further their agendas. The Chinese have come out and stated that they want global domination by the year 2050.
They have.
And they're taking action globally to that end. So why attack Canada? A lot of it is control. A lot of it is about getting inside, infiltrating, putting some back doors in, causing disruption. There's a number of reasons that they're doing it. It's also an easy backdoor into the United States. And that's what the book is about, is the fact that Canada is such a soft target that we've become a national security threat to the United States.
What do you mean we're a soft target? Surely we're tough Canadians, aren't we, Scott? What are you talking about?
I think, we like to believe that we are. We have an intelligent population, but the fact of the matter is we don't have the means, we don't have the capability or assets to confront the Chinese, let alone enforce any of the activity that they're conducting. Some of this activity is licit, a lot of it is illicit. But our justice system and legislation allows for a lot of this activity to continue. That's why we have the national inquiry coming up to talk about foreign interference. And foreign interference is just a small portion of hybrid warfare, which is what the Chinese are conducting against Canada.
Okay, so this is a bit like an iceberg, if you will. We're seeing only part of it. We see cyber attacks all the time. I mean, it's coming from somewhere, and we know to a large degree where it's coming from, and China is a big source of it. And we also have, as you mentioned, this week, the launching of Canada's inquiry into foreign influence. It's multifaceted. So do you have any hope that that inquiry is going to really get at the heart of these issues and show the kind of influence that the CPC has had on past federal elections, and which is clearly a big problem, and elsewhere? Do you have any hope that that inquiry is going to get at the bottom of it?
To be honest, I don't. I think there will be things and revelations for people that don't know what's going on. I think it will be of interest to them. I think there'll be, there'll be information that's provided that's going to generate some awareness of what's happening. I think a lot of it will be explained away, though. I mean, and the reason for that is that the corruption and compromise runs so deep that it will impact heavily all of our political parties, a lot of our corporations. Things that Canadians believe are still operating efficiently. And while we can, keep the country running and going, economically we're suffering terribly. And to blame just the government for mismanagement is one reason, but I would dare say the intent of the Chinese and some other nations is quite extensive.
Okay, so we're going to dive into that, but just to make sure we don't miss the headline. So you're saying the inquiry is more about a political message that, wow, we're looking at this issue of Chinese influence now that the cat's out of the bag and people are becoming more aware of this. The people that are running these inquiries, they don't necessarily want to get to the bottom of it because it kind of implicates them. Is that the risk that we're facing?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. They've been leveraged into having to do something here, and they've been given enough time to start to make some manipulations of their own. The people that are being given standing are questionable. The people that aren't given standing speaks volumes. I think it's going to be another whitewash, just like the BC money laundering inquiry.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, let's hope you're wrong, but we need to keep our eyes open. So, what do you think in terms of the audience? What do you think is going on here in terms of warfare on Canada and the West, as well as do you see any hope for the inquiry that's just been launched this week? And so, as you think about your questions, we'd love to hear them. Please pose them, and we'll put them in our discussion here. But I do want to tell you, Scott, you have a very interesting story because you've kind of had your own revelation. In fact, I would say the Mosaic Effect, the book that you read, kind of gives a glimpse into that story of understanding this very issue, that Canada is being systematically undermined and attacked by China, obviously not through kinetic warfare, but through other forms of warfare. So can you tell us in a nutshell how you came to this revelation yourself?
Ooh, in a nutshell, it's hard. It took a couple careers, I guess you would say. My time in the military overseas, getting an understanding of what transnational organized crime was and how it relates to national security. And then when I moved from the military to the RCMP as an intelligence advisor to federal serious organized crime, generating that interest because there were people that were starting to sort of uncover things but didn't know what it exactly meant. I brought in the term hybrid warfare, and they start to understand a bit better how nation states conduct, this type of unrestricted, fight in the gray zone, if you will. And so that sort of opened it up. I was given a pilot project to look into convergences between transnational organized crime and national security, because within Canadian law enforcement, unlike the rest of the Five Eyes, we don't have a policy on national security, on transnational organized crime, making it a national security threat. In 2011, Obama did that, and that allowed law enforcement and other agencies like the CIA, et cetera, that have classified information to be able to share that information. We don't have that in Canada. And so I was given, the ability to look at all of the files, both on the classified side and on the protected side. And we saw the convergences between entities that were conducting illicit activity, but also national security level crimes, if you will. And so, yeah, by doing that, we start to open our eyes to exactly the extent of what's happening. And the center of gravity really is the Chinese influence. Yes, we have others. We have Iranians and cartels, and they're all working together. Like, this doesn't happen in isolation. But the fact that nation states, state-sponsored activity is occurring, is a bit of a shocker. And it kind of, I think to be honest, it set the RCMP back a bit because they're not ready to deal with something that big.
Okay, so just hold on for a sec there. You've said a lot there, Scott, that
Yes.
could kind of fly past us here. But you're saying essentially that there's all this transnational crime going on, and that's joined at the hip with a key state actor, namely the superpower named China. Is that so they're working together against Canada? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, hybrid warfare is basically transnational organized crime, which includes threat finance, and the subset of that is money laundering. It includes sharp power, which is political influence, and
Okay.
soft power, which is the economic side. So economic subversion of a country, and then what we're seeing with the foreign interference piece in our politics. Those are the three main categories. That you'll see if you're intrigued by hybrid warfare and you start to Google it, you'll see that there's other terminology that's utilized: cognitive warfare and psychological operations, and all these other things, because it impacts every level of society.
So this isn't some type of theory. This is going on every day because it's hybrid warfare. It's not kinetic warfare. It's not like we've got guns out fighting each other through regular armed forces per se, but they've put everything on the table. So you have to kind of look at it through that lens. Is that right, Scott?
Yes, I mean there's actual government reference documents that identify these things within the Five Eyes community. Law enforcement is woken up to it. In Canada, CSIS, our domestic intelligence agency, is waking up to it. So, being focused on counterterrorism for so long, there's been awareness. A colleague of mine, Michelle Juno Katsuya, wrote a report called the Sidewinder Report, which was classified with the RCMP.
Very
and
important.
Yeah, it's quite important, and it really touches on how government, politicians, and our corporate world have been manipulated and influenced by the Chinese. Some of it unwittingly, and some of it, I would have to say, complicit. So yeah, there's a lot of information that's been brewing for a number of years. I know this book really made Michelle quite happy because that information finally came out and is available to the public, so they can make their own determination. And as we're seeing, sentiment towards China is changing because of the awareness around the activity that they're conducting in Canada.
Yeah, indeed. So this is a clear and present danger, as we say it, throughout history. If we look at the Soviets, among others, this is a clear and present danger. So is Canada really coming together now? Do you see a glimmer of hope? Like, I know the inquiry, you would be skeptical of it, but surely, well, let me put it this way. If we had this conversation, say 5, let alone 10 years ago, I think the tone around the perception around China would have been very different. Like, I would say very positive, generally kind of naive, if I can use that word. But it's shifting now, is it not? As people wake up a bit more. But this is not a common conversation, is it, Scott? Still.
No, it's still the conversation that is had generally is that the awareness isn't there. People are so busy going to and from work, and they're worried about the normal things like gangs that are going on downtown, homelessness, the price of vegetables at the store.
Yeah.
And they don't look at root cause necessarily. Even within law enforcement itself, understanding those things is difficult because you're so wrapped up in a single investigation. You're not allowed to look outside of it because that would ruin the disclosure, et cetera, in court. But I tell you, we've spoken to a number of Chinese dissidents, and how they've been treated by the mainland Chinese.
Hmm.
Um, these things are now coming to fruition, and that's really driving Canadians' perceptions because we are naive and because we believe in fairness, etc. We called the Uyghur genocide what it was, a genocide, and people are like, "Hey, that's not right." And China's conducting this activity. Human rights are
And,
being
and, and I should
trampled.
just clarify the Uyghurs are the Muslim minority in China, which is often used for really, in effect, slave labor to produce all kinds of goods, including things that you might even be wearing on your shoes.
Yeah, they're in concentration camps. They're in political rehabilitation camps,
Mhm.
and it's terrible. I mean, there's whole commissions on what's going on there,
Mhm.
and unfortunately, we're yet to see the Mujahideen or anyone else step up and come in to try to help them, like we did see with the Chechens in Russia. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, so that level of control is definitely concerning. Canadian sentiment is slowly turning,
Mhm.
but I dare say, whenever we've spoken to Chinese nationals, if when you ask the question, if Canada end up going to war with China, who would you side with? I mean, there's no doubt they go to with China. It's a superpower,
Mhm.
and that's scary because you think that you get a taste of freedom, that you're going to want to go with the side that's about human rights and having your democratic abilities to vote people in and that kind of. No, they have no interest. They know that the Chinese are dominant and they want to see the rise of China.
So let's talk a little bit more about hybrid warfare. If we look at the 360-degree overview of these issues, we can see a lot of patterns. I think what you have often alluded to, Scott, in conversation with you is the art of connecting the dots. So if you look at, for example, if we think of the question, how would this be impacting Canadians' lives? Let's just think of transnational crime. And I want to give you one example that comes on my radar right away, and that would be the whole phenomenon of the importation of fentanyl through all these borders. And because we know that I think most fentanyl, if not all of it, is produced in China. Is that correct?
No. So a lot of fentanyl is produced in China. And in the beginning, I would say that was probably quite true. Um, we had the DEA scientists come to RCMP, and we had a giant meeting with, all the different agencies, et cetera. There must have been 50 people in the room. And the dialogue around synthetic narcotics is a complex one. You only have to change one molecule, and suddenly it's no longer you know a controlled substance, which makes it very difficult to arrest people. Now, because it's synthetic, what we see is, and unfortunately, something I'm going to be telling your viewers right now is the federal government was providing money to try to stop China from sending, fentanyl in pages of a book, where you can order it on the black market, and it's going to come here, and if CBSA gets it, they'll just send you another one for free. So it's very difficult to stop that. So you have a factory in China, on one side is producing legitimate fentanyl for use for hospitals. On the other side, well, that's the extra quota that goes out the back door,
Wow.
and they make more money that way. The
So
problem,
just to clarify,
yep,
so a lot of fentanyl is coming in through what in effect the parcel mail service because it's just so small. It's so potent that that can be divided up and then integrated into the drug system. Is that part of the dilemma here? So it's very hard to stop this, but yet China is the majority player when it comes to producing fentanyl, is it not?
it certainly is. But I'm gonna throw a hook at you here, and that is precursors are being sent to Canada by the truckloads, 60,000 tons at a time in sea containers. And those are not illegal. And so they get delivered. And then guess what? We produce our own fentanyl, and it
Wow,
gets exported to the United
horrible.
States and everywhere else. The funding for fentanyl was going to government agencies. And when they found this out, you need that money to fight this. And so you couldn't come and say, hey, we're also producing this stuff. We are a threat to other nations. Australia and the United States have already identified us as a threat to their own countries. This stuff's
Wow.
being sent to Mexico. The worst part is this: in Canada, anybody can buy a pill press. So think about that for a second.
Hmm.
So pill presses are how you get, green 80s, which are fake OxyContin pills that are
Hmm.
made with fentanyl. And these overdoses we see quite often are people that were on the medical system for, normal injuries and were given these narcotics, but
Hmm.
they were cut off. And so they had to find it somewhere. And so this was a promise of, pain relief. Unfortunately, 2 grains of sand size of fentanyl will kill you. And so these pill presses aren't just used for making fentanyl pills. They're used for making ecstasy and everything else.
Hmm.
So they're contaminated. They're not hygienic by any means. And so you see all these pills coming out, and 900 people a year in Vancouver are dying from fentanyl overdoses.
Yeah. So when it comes to the whole issue of doing business in China, one of the things I've marveled at, Scott, is that their framework is well established. If you do business in China, you've got to sign essentially a 49-51 split with the Chinese in charge.
Mhm.
So Apple, based in China, is no longer a North American company. It is truly a Chinese company because they're in charge. And then you also have to agree to a systematic transfer of all your intellectual property. So ultimately, that IP, isn't that the basis for our standard of living? That like it's great that people want to access that market in China if you're a business, but at what price? And then we wonder why we have a withering manufacturing sector in Canada. Is this not part of their strategy?
Yes, I mean, from reverse engineering to intellectual property theft, those are huge. So the brain drain from the West, where we have the greatest innovation,
Hmm.
is being completely absorbed by China, who then are able to, because they've been in the manufacturing of these, things that Canada needs, the West needs, they're able to replicate them, and oftentimes they will just create a new name for it. Like you can go get yourself a pair of Nikes or an Apple phone or whatever. Might not be called that, but the technology is the same.
Hmm.
The design may be the same. So yeah, there's definitely this loss on our side, because we can't maintain it. The Chinese are very smart at that. They've been doing this for a long time. And how do we stop it? That's the trick. You pull out of there, but what's the fallout? Now suddenly we can't get goods at an affordable price given our inflation rates. It's a catch-22.
Well, so I do have a question from the audience, and it is, how do we delink from China? I know that's often a word that's used, but now that we're doing business with China, is there a way to, I think if I understand the question, step away from China so that we can actually better chart our own course, or is that not possible?
Well, I think right now, this has been occurring for a while. So this isn't exactly new information, and companies have been trying to step away from China for their manufacturing. They've
Mhm.
gone to countries like Thailand, Vietnam, etc. The counter to that is China's just gone into Vietnam and Thailand and bought up the corporations that are being used there. So now you can have "Made in Vietnam" written on your shirt, but really it's the same regime that's controlling it. So
Okay.
that battle's ongoing. I would dare say that we're better to look at our NAFTA partners and start refining goods in our own country as well as in Mexico.
Well, I remember well, last summer in 2023, it was a regular visit of state leaders, including the president of Germany and Japan, asking for more energy from Canada.
Mm.
And I think there is a robust business case. I remember being in London a few summers ago and talking with some senior people there, saying that, well, if energy is a concern in the UK as well as Europe, because particularly because of security issues with the war between Ukraine and Russia, Canada could supply all the needs of energy, whether it's LNG or like liquefied natural gas. In other words, like so, we have enormous opportunities as a country. And it is incredible that a prime minister says we have no business case to export there. So, anyways, that's another related issue here, is that Canada can develop our economy. So this is going to take a while to delink from China, is it not?
It absolutely is. The shortest distance between Canada and China, or just the Southeast Asia, runs into a place called Prince Rupert up on the British coast, British
Indeed.
Columbia coast. Well, the bad part is that, yes, we have a pipeline going there. That's fantastic. Except that port is owned by the Port of Dubai. The property around that location is being bought up by the Chinese as we speak. And I dare say that there's some concerns there when the RCMP pulled their federal assets out of Prince Rupert. It also has a rail line that is used to distribute goods. So there's concerns around us being able to do these things because other people are making money off it instead of nationalizing something where Canada gets reaps the full benefit of it. So yeah, there's still tweaks that we need to do. We have enough natural resources. We should be refining our own goods. Canada should be one of the richest countries in the world.
Indeed.
We should have no homeless problems. We should have no housing issues. It's astonishing, is what it is.
It really is. So speaking of energy policy, I do have a question. Is the net zero just transition policies, are they actually supporting China versus helping Canada?
Well, when you're comparing Canada to China, I mean, Canada is the greatest consumer of coal in the world. So who's polluting the globe the most? And I mean, carbon wise, I mean, Canada is as green as it comes. We have a population of 45 million people in a massive country. So our carbon footprint, it's admirable that, everyone wants to do their part. We don't want the world to be all polluted so that we can't enjoy it. But I mean, you've got to compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges here. If those countries aren't doing it, and they're never going to do it.
But if you look at Canada, we are one of the most diversified energy producers, including both oil and gas, as well as hydroelectric power and nuclear. In fact, 65% of Ontario's electricity is produced by the nuclear program. So it's really quite a remarkable energy powerhouse. And so the irony is that if we work to shut down our oil and gas industry, which is the goal of the current federal policy, then we are ironically importing all these goods from China, and they're produced there with, albeit probably very little environmental protection. And so the irony is that we're actually making the environment worse. Are we not, Scott?
That would be my estimate too. That I mean, petroleum is used in so many products; it's never going away. The fact that you're trying to limit it is definitely concerning, given the fact that it's used by all of the superpowers that are economically stable that require what we have. So are you saving that for when someone else takes us over and then they can, it's very concerning that our natural resources aren't being refined in our own country, and then being sent back to us at a higher cost, in the name of trade relations. Don't get me wrong. It's nice to be friendly with everyone and help them out and, spread the wealth. But, selling everything off in bulk and then buying it back, at 10, 100 times what it, would have cost us to develop ourselves, I think is a bit foolhardy.
It really is. So Scott, it's interesting, if we look at the history of China, there's a long, long history, and it's really incredible, the Chinese culture and accomplishments on so many fronts. But one of the things that's interesting about Chinese history is that they have an ability to work with neighbors and basically work with the elites of those neighbors to basically get them under influence and control. And you alluded to that as the phenomenon of hard power, the exercise of influence the Chinese have over our elites. And that's, obviously a relationship in foreign affairs referred to commonly as, like, they have a history of creating vassal states, basically nearby states that operate but are actually within the orbit and firm influence and control of China. So is Canada now at this time a vassal state of China? I know that sounds like an absurd question, but is that a fair question?
You know, in the circles that I run in my intelligence network, and speaking to some very insightful individuals that are Chinese dissidents, they've come right out and said that Canada is already a vassal state of China. Diplomatic warfare, if that falls under political warfare or whatever you want like to call it, um, is definitely something the Chinese engage in and are perfected in a lot of ways. Compromising from our grassroots to our federal politics is a classic example of exactly how you can control a country,
Mhm,
um, and move it towards your stated agenda, which, like I stated earlier, was global control by 2050.
mhm.
It's not just happening in Canada. Canada just happens to be one of the easier targets, and is right next door to the United States. We're the perfect place for them to try and gain influence, gain control, and undermine the United States. That's the larger target, but
Okay.
Canada is the victim of all that.
Okay. So they really, as you see it geopolitically, they're very much obviously competing head to head with their other superpower, namely the United States. So Canada's an easy entry point. But Canada has also a lot to offer if you look at surely the objectives of China, and that is to keep the Communist Party of China firmly in power. And part of that is feeding the overall control and economic future of the country. So Canada, with its resources, is a natural target. Is it not, Scott?
Absolutely. China's suffering right now. Xi Jinping came out publicly and told the population not to throw out their food scraps, because they import 80% of their food. That's why you see probably the largest illicit activity in the world is what the Chinese do with their illegal fishing.
Mhm.
They're raping the world's seas. They surrounded the Galapagos Island with 400 vessels, and they're just fishing anywhere they want and can. And another side of that is in the South China Sea, for instance, fishermen wear two hats. They wear a military hat with the People's Liberation Army Navy, and they'll throw that jacket on and say, "Hey, we're allowed to fish here, and you guys can get out of here." And that's what we're seeing with the Philippines and some of that activity there now.
Well,
Um, yeah, so it's a big deal for them to be able to feed a population of that size. Weaponizing their population has been ongoing for quite some time. If you look at what's happening in Africa, when you're sending your prisoners to go and work in factories in Africa, you're getting countries to adopt the yuan as their national currency. The Belt and Road Initiative, which is tied to other countries that are not necessarily in line with Western interests, then you'll see that there's a bigger push here, a global push towards hegemony.
so if we look at, I should just mention again, I'm talking with intelligence analyst Scott McGregor, and we're talking about, is Canada at war with China? We certainly see lots of evidence of it. It's not kinetic, but it is certainly present if we look at transnational crime and how the state of China is working with them, money laundering, United Front. I think of also the fact that in Canada, we actually have Chinese police stations. How can this be, Scott? Why are they there? And what are they doing? And why are we putting up with it?
Again, so the infiltration of Canada goes into all of our institutions. There are Chinese individuals working for the state, um, in basically everything that we have in Canada.
Mhm.
And whether that's using organized crime figures or sending people over that go to school that take positions as engineers, it's everywhere. And that information is required by Chinese law that any citizen or anyone with ancestry, is how they look at it, is required to provide information back to the government.
Wow.
So we have espionage being conducted all the time. Uh, our awareness of it is slowly increasing. Um, I'm not sure if people are aware of the head of the RCMP's intelligence, Karen Ordis, uh, who's in prison right now, part of that is because he was looking into a file that I helped with the RCMP, and that was tied to, and I would say tied to because it was a couple doors down from the location where the largest money laundering case in Canadian history was occurring, which had directly to do with the Chinese. And the people that were there were utilizing the hardware that was provided through that company.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can look at the fact that Mr. Ortis and who his connections are in the Chinese community, how he speaks fluent Chinese, who his mentor was, what's happening at the University of British Columbia, where we have United Front figure prominently, supporting part of the university. And I think we touch on this in the book to a certain extent. But naturally, we have to be very careful when it comes to the legal side of this, because a lot of these things haven't been tested in court yet. And part of that is because our justice system isn't up to par or near comparable to what the United States has. And so you're taking a big risk when you start to cite these things because there isn't a precedent. But we do have knowledge that we're not the only ones looking at this stuff. Law enforcement is looking at this. The RCMP is looking at this. CSIS is looking at this, and that's in Canada. All the Five Eyes are looking at this. The Australians are looking at what's happening in Canada. The Americans, I work extensively with these guys. Exactly what's going on here.
Who are the Five Eyes? Just remind us of that, Scott.
So the Five Eyes intelligence community is Canada, Australia, Great Britain, the United States, and New Zealand.
And so that example of Cameron Ortis
Mm-hmm.
is really quite a disturbing example where you had a very senior, really at the highest level, security officer, and this is quite a revelation that we just saw the last few months, was charged and convicted with treason espionage, as I recall, and I think is serving how long a sentence, Scott, now?
I'm not sure if they've actually come up with the final sentencing.
Okay, but regardless, it's a very serious issue, a serious breach in security, as it appears that he was working closely with the Chinese state's operative, and it ended up really compromising Canadian security. And he was, I think, one of the main liaisons with the whole Five Eyes intelligence community. So it's done enormous damage to Canada's standing and issues. So be sure to look at that issue. So as we look to the final parts of our discussion here, Scott, I did want to talk more about what we can do as Canadians. But I do have one question. I welcome questions to continue to flow in from the audience. And that is, does the Chinese involvement, are they involved as a state actor with human trafficking?
So is China involved with human trafficking?
Yes.
100%. I actually worked the Chinese migrant files when the ships came into the West Coast, and the snake handlers, and how these things there were already established rules for these things.
You're losing me. What are snake handlers? I don't understand this. Sure. Like they're handling snakes or people? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, no, it's a title that's given to someone that's in control of the human smuggling operation. So snake handlers, snakeheads.
Wow.
Yeah, and they tend to be the ones that are deciding where these people go. A lot of them were headed to the United States, to New York and other places, and they'll become sex traffickers, or they'll work in a fentanyl factory. Who knows? But yeah, they're being used. They pay their way over, and then they don't end up where they think they're going to end up. Wow. They're it's indentured servitude, really. But that's one way. The other way that depending on the term human smuggler, when you're bringing in entities into the country illicitly, there was a gentleman that was arrested. Last name was Wang in Vancouver, who had forged like 5,000 passports. We have birthing clinics in Vancouver, where you're flying over when you're 8 months pregnant to have your baby in Canada, then flying back a month later. So there's lots of ways that you're compromising our immigration and our customs. Yeah.
Wow. So what I find probably a surprise, most people would be surprised by this, is the willingness of the Chinese state to work with really anybody and anybody to get their objectives done, and in the process really undermine the health of our society. And so, speaking of health, is of course culture. Culture is a big deal, whether it comes to a family, an organization, or even a country. So, and the example that comes to my mind is Chinese technology, specifically TikTok, as an example, which is really popular among a certain age set, a younger one. And what's remarkable is that TikTok is very different in China versus as it is in North America or the rest of the West. So in China, my understanding is that TikTok is very focused on patriotism and unity and respecting authority, namely the Communist Party of China. Whereas in North America, TikTok's emphasis is on absurd things and obviously never-ending cat videos, but also things that relate to division and hatred. And so October 7, I just saw this report coming last week. The number of stories related to the Hamas terrorist group and how they were in fact being persecuted unfairly rose by thousands of percent. So, like, is it a propaganda tool to manipulate culture and narrative? And is the Chinese state, to a large measure, coordinating and working behind that?
So the answer is yes. TikTok is one piece of technology that's utilized by the Chinese and others, but that subliminal messaging is definitely something that they've been working on for a long, long time. Now,
You say subliminal messaging, so is actually using our minds against us, some measure.
Cognitive warfare, psychological operations, influence operations. And it doesn't seem as obvious because that platform is used in a number of ways, like with all the TikTok challenges and everything else that's out there. And it seems fun and endearing. And, you do have a measure of control because you're going to look at what you want to look at. But the fact of the matter is, when that feed is controlled, they can target things. So when you collect information on big data like that, you can start to see who looks at what. So
Right.
if you have anti-government sentiment and you're making TikToks about that, then you can be more targeted than someone that's looking at cat videos. I'll give you another example. You're getting robocalls on your phone and they come up in Chinese and you don't know what the heck they're saying, so you hang up. Not everybody hangs up. So part of what that is about is identifying who at what number speaks the language and who is an asset should they try to conduct another kind of operation, or who can they reach out to. So that information is utilized in different ways by intelligence agencies in China. There's social credit and corporate credit. There are also considerations. I wrote an article about a hot pot place in Vancouver that went viral in Taiwan and India, mainly in Taiwan. Australia, I did an interview with Sky News on it. And they had over 60 casino level cameras inside. And this is in downtown Vancouver, basically. And here you are, you go in there and they're recording what you're saying, who you're talking to. When we interviewed the manager, he said the information was being sent back to China to their security services. And then they thought they were going to sue us, and they didn't. Instead, during COVID, when no one could even really hardly go in there, they decided to do renovations, and they took out all the cameras.
No kidding.
There's 900 of these all over the world. So that was about social credit.
900. So to be clear, the state there is monitoring systematically emigres and others right around the world. So this is really quite a massive operation.
Oh, it goes much deeper. Depending on how deep you want to go. This speaks to, collecting DNA from every individual that they can in the world, or imagery. So if you want facial recognition software that can recognize everyone in the world, I get a picture of you. I can tell you who you are based on that data set. So there's a lot going on in China. They still believe in the master race. piece.
Pardon
Uh,
me? I'm sorry,
oh,
I'm not aware of that.
yeah. Oh, yeah. So yeah, the Han Chinese believe that they are a master race, and they're looking at ways to improve their DNA and advance their biologics. There's a lot of things that are going on right now. I think you'll
Hmm.
see some of the biometric stuff come out in the news soon. There's been some arrests in the United States related to these things. But yeah, there's more similarities to what we saw with the Germans in the Second World War than people want to admit.
Wow,
Um, I
that's
mean,
quite a
when you're
revelation.
cloning animals and then you say you're not going to clone humans, and
Mhm.
yet that was how many years ago? 20
Wow.
years.
So
Um,
if we look at things that we can do, like if we
mm,
think of policy prescriptions, I mean, we've got this inquiry. It looks a little bit shaky in terms of its ability to really get at things. But surely awareness is a key part of this. We need to wake up with our eyes open when we can actually see.
mhm.
But we also need to do other things and pay attention to, well, should we be using TikTok? Probably not, Scott. Um, what are things that we can be doing here, Scott, to turn this ship around and getting things together, like rebuilding our military, for instance?
Yeah, the creating the dialogue is the biggest one, and taking steps towards having our elected officials actually do what we ask them to do and
Mm,
holding them accountable. You'll see protests in France where they're burning houses and turning things over because they're upset about their pension. And yet in Canada, we try to protest something and suddenly the government puts the Emergency Measures Act on, which, as we know now, was illegal. We are not the outspoken, forceful people, but we do have power, and the people that have always been quiet and gotten along and just gone with it and just wanted to work hard and hope that you get to retirement. Those days are starting to end, and you really have to start to speak up and speak truth to power, because this stuff isn't going away. They count on us not doing anything about it. They count on us not making any changes, to our enforcement, our justice system, our legislation, or delaying it or deflecting it. And that's what you're going to see in this national inquiry.
mhm.
Even the recommendations, I'll tell you right now, the recommendations that come out of this are going to be minimal. They'll be managed, and just like they were with the inquiry for money laundering.
Wow. So you're really challenging us, Scott, to wake up, open up our eyes, not to be passive, and to realize that there's a lot of aggressive actions being taken by the Communist Party of China against the West, including Canada. And one of those things that behooves us to ask, well, what about our institutions? You've talked about elected officials. What about the post-secondary side, the universities? Have you documented or a lot of evidence that those places have been infiltrated with a lot of operatives?
Oh yes, there's tons of reference material out there right now, in academia, in the media. Uh, exactly to what you're speaking to is that
In
those institutions have been infiltrated
in
heavily.
in the media, what do you mean by that?
In the media, I mean that there are news articles covering, investigative journalists that have delved into these things. Um, you're going to look at a lot of universities in the United States and Canada that are
Mhm.
completely compromised. In
So,
fact, I would
so
dare say there are professors at some of these universities that are frightened.
yeah, and so we know a lot of cases about this. We're probably only scratching the surface. I think of just this past year, the charges and convictions of senior faculty at a number of universities, including Harvard, for being systematically on the payroll of the Chinese and sharing and systematically transferring research and knowledge to those agencies. So it's shame on them. I mean, it's just criminal what's been going on here. So we've taken a really hands-off, naive view of this relationship. So it's about time that we ask our government to get on it. It's not just the inquiry, but it should be a full court press to what? Formulate a team on this, Scott? What would you do? Like basic um, defensive action is to create a team and find out what the heck's going on, isn't it?
You would hope so. I think that given the current state of affairs within our government, it's very difficult to find or have approved um, people that are qualified and have the insight into exactly what's happening, because a lot of this is being poo-pooed in Ottawa,
Hmm.
and that's a problem. I mean,
So why do you say being poo-pooed? What do you mean by that?
I mean that a lot of this stuff's being explained away. I mean, what happened with Han Dong, having an official speaking to a Chinese consulate member while we are
Yeah.
holding a Chinese national in jail to be
So
extradited.
can you explain what happened there? If people don't know that story, it's really quite outrageous what happened.
Yeah, so we have a sitting member of parliament that is in direct communication with the Chinese consulate in Ontario. And Lord knows what they're discussing. I mean, there's a lot of
Mhm.
assertions that have been made, and CISA statements that have been apparently leaked, and the fact that they're having conversations at all during a time when we're holding a Chinese national on criminal activity, which I'm going to bring up, relates to Iran. Okay, so this is about China working with Iran, which is one of their allies. This is a much bigger thing than people realize. But the fact that he's speaking to them alone it compromises the national security of Canada. And yet our government decided to just look past it.
But to be
He
clear,
became
we had an
independent
elected
and then was
official.
absorbed back into the parliament.
Yeah, so we had an elected official weighing in with a Chinese consulate,
Mm-hmm.
signaling to them to do what? Not to release the two Michaels. Remember, the two Michaels were essentially kidnapped in China on false charges, or supposedly, and they were being held hostage in prison for well over a year.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an election coming up, and this elected official signaled to the Chinese, whatever you do, make sure that you don't release them now. Is that right?
So I believe that's what's alleged to have been said. I can't speak to that
Okay.
specifically, because I know that there's a lot of controversy around
All right.
that. I can tell you this: it's not the first time the Chinese have done the same thing. There's a man named Bin Su out of Richmond who was spying on Boeing. The Americans had us extradite him back to the United States.
Mhm.
The Chinese kidnapped two Canadians then too. And unfortunately for the Chinese, this guy spilled the beans. I believe he got 2 years for theft, and I believe he's back in Vancouver. I don't even know.
Yeah.
But those two Canadians were on the North Korean border. I think they were missionaries, and they were subsequently released, just like
Wow.
the two Eagles. So kidnap politics is a part of what they do.
So, in this context, it behooves citizens to speak up to their officials who are supposed to be governing in the interest of who? Canadians, not in the interest of any other party, let alone China. So, in this context, does it make any sense as well, Scott, to look at how we, I don't know, use our money? Where do we buy products from? As much as possible, buy products made from what? Canada is probably the place to buy it from.
I would dare say that we have the population with an intelligence level, that is up there to refine our own goods. And if it's a matter of finding the labor, well, we joined NAFTA for a reason, and we still have a disparity with the peso. I would dare say Mexico would be the perfect place for us to be doing business. It's closer. We can send stuff by rail and by truck if we need to.
Hmm.
And Mexico's a partner of ours. That's just one opportunity. I would dare say there's others, but you don't want to necessarily be doing the level of business that we're doing with what we consider an enemy. They're a threat nation. They're not our friends. They're a communist country. It's not. When the people were leaving Russia, and during the Olympics or something like that, what do we call those people? Defectors. So how is it that they're leaving China in droves and bringing illicit money and infiltrating our politics and doing all these things, and they're okay? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's all right.
yeah, they're not doing that without the knowledge and the blessing, the approval of the Chinese state.
That's right.
Exactly. So this has been a eye-opening discussion, and I've really appreciated the audience questions. I really Thank you for participating. And I wish you all the very best, Scott, as you continue to uh, analyze this very important set of revelations. And I thank you for writing the book, The Mosaic Effect. And I just encourage people to look at that book and to also open up their eyes when it comes to this very real war that's being waged on our dear country. And as Canadians, let this be an opportunity to renew our loyalty to our country and citizenship and what that means. And I just encourage you to pass this recording on to friends and colleagues and ask them, what do you think? What are you observing? And let's keep an eye on the inquiry that's being launched this week. And of course, I'm sure we'll be having you back on, Scott, as we keep track of the pace of the inquiry and see if we can actually start getting to the heart of the matter. So thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, David.
You bet. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And we're so glad that you can continue to support our work and make sure you like us and share the word. Thank you and have a great day.